Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When I moved into Oakwind Trails, I thought I'd found suburban paradise. But behind the white fences and polite smiles lurked a nightmare named Karen, a clipboard-wielding HOA tyrant. What started as grilling salmon turned into a war for freedom, and I was done playing nice. I still remember the day I moved into Oakwind Trails like it happened last week. The sky was that washed-out Arizona blue, not a cloud in sight, the kind of dry heat that makes your skin tighten but doesn't quite break a sweat. My U-Haul rumbled down those palm-lined streets, and I felt like I was entering some pristine utopia. Uniform mailboxes, identical hedges, dogs that didn't bark, and neighbors who waved like they'd rehearsed it. I had just turned 33, landed a remote automation engineering contract, and figured this was the kind of place where I could finally relax, grow some tomatoes, and maybe learn to grill without setting something on fire. And at first, it really did seem perfect. The house was a clean 3-bedroom with solar panels, a patio that caught just enough shade, and a quiet cul-de-sac that felt like the kind of place you only saw in real estate commercials. There was a homeowner association, of course, but the realtor brushed it off. Just some light community guidelines to keep things tidy. I signed without a second thought. The first year passed in a blissful haze of patio beers, garage projects, and polite nods from neighbors whose names I promptly forgot. I got used to the newsletters, the seasonal potlucks, and even the passive-aggressive bulletins about approved mulch coloration. Harmless nonsense, I figured. Every suburb needs a hobby. Then Karen Lassiter became president of the HOA board. The newsletter suddenly doubled in size and tripled in authority. Overnight, a document that once reminded people not to feed ducks turned into a handbook on suburban militarization. Karen introduced new rules like a politician mid-scandal, fast, loud, and with the tone of someone who believes God personally appointed her to oversee symmetrical shrubbery. Christmas lights had to be white. Trash bins were only allowed curbside between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. And don't even get me started on the seasonal decor compliance inspections. Still, I held out hope. I tried to be a good neighbor. I trimmed my hedges, repainted the mailbox when mine apparently faded into an unapproved bronze tone, and replaced my back porch lights because they were aggressively luminous. It got worse. By year 3, Karen had installed new surveillance cameras at both entrances to the neighborhood and proudly announced the HOA had partnered with a third-party security analytics firm. She called it proactive. I called it pre-crime. One family down the street got fined for having an unapproved inflatable snowman. Another was threatened with eviction over a lawn flamingo. I started to wonder if I'd accidentally moved into a gated cult. Still, I kept quiet until the grill incident. I just bought a top-of-the-line electric grill. Sleek, quiet, efficient, the kind of thing that made you feel like maybe you didn't totally waste your life in engineering school. I set it up on the patio, grilled some salmon, and by the next morning, I had a violation notice stuck to my door with tape that probably violated OSHA. Unapproved cooking apparatus visible from common area. Fine, $300. Deadline, immediate. I called the HOA office, ready to be civil. Karen picked up. "Mr. Ketterman," she said, her voice soaked in artificial politeness. "We all have to make sacrifices for community standards." I told her I wasn't sacrificing my salmon for the aesthetic purity of her HOA commandments. She told me to consult page 26, subsection D of the Seasonal Fire Hazard Guideline Annex. I hung up before I started swearing. Then came the final straw, a $400 fine for excessive garage illumination. Apparently, the motion light above my garage door was triggering too frequently and disrupting the nocturnal ambiance. That was it. That was the moment I opened my file drawer, dusted off the original closing documents, and remembered a little footnote I hadn't thought about in years. A line about a land use clause from 1998, the kind that could legally exempt my property from the HOA if triggered during a full title transfer. I did some digging, deep digging. I called the county clerk. I requested archived records. I paid for legal verification. And sure enough, the clause was real. My property had been one of the last remaining lots from before Oakwind Trails formally incorporated. Legally, I could sell it. And legally, the new owner could opt out of HOA jurisdiction. I remember staring at the confirmation email and feeling something between vindication and adrenaline. It was like finding a hidden exit in a building you thought was sealed shut. I didn't know yet how Karen would react, but in that moment, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was getting out. The day I listed my house, I half expected a drone to crash into my "for sale by owner" sign. I kept it quiet at first. No social media posts, no neighborhood gossip. Just a discreet listing through a private real estate attorney and a bulletproof clause. Property not subject to HOA jurisdiction post-sale under 1998 easement revision. It was my legal escape tunnel, and I wasn't giving Karen a single inch to block it. The buyer came faster than I expected, a private investor named Patrick, whose entire pitch was, "I just want to own something no one can tell me what to do with." The man spoke my language. No interest in community meetings, no plans to rent it, no intention of joining the HOA, just pure, blessed independence. He signed the offer in under 48 hours. That's when Karen got wind of it. I still don't know who tipped her off, or maybe one of the board rats who reports anything that smells like freedom. Or maybe she has the title office on speed dial. Either way, 3 days after the offer went under contract, she showed up on my porch wearing a floral blouse that somehow looked like a threat. She had a clipboard under her arm and a face like she was preparing to deliver an exorcism. "Mr. Ketterman," she said, all tight smiles and forced pleasantness. "We need to discuss the exit inspection." "There is no exit inspection," I replied, leaning against the doorframe with my coffee. "The transaction doesn't fall under HOA authority." Karen's nostrils flared. "Every property within Oakwind Trails must undergo pre-sale compliance review." "Not this one," I said, and handed her a certified letter, signed, stamped, and filed with the county registrar, formally documenting my property's exemption. Her eyes scanned the page, and I watched the exact moment she realized she couldn't legally stop the sale. "I'll be contesting this," she said coldly. "Be my guest," I answered. "The buyer's already confirmed. Closing's in 3 weeks." Karen left without another word, but the fallout started almost immediately. That evening, several neighbors received anonymous HOA bulletins claiming I was under legal dispute for non-compliance and that potential buyers should exercise caution due to unresolved zoning concerns. I got 3 calls from concerned residents, 2 friendly, 1 vaguely hostile, all of them repeating the same lie. "Karen said you're being forced out." I spent the next morning emailing copies of the exemption clause to the title company, the buyer, and my lawyer, just in case. By the weekend, Karen escalated. She left a typed letter on my doorstep with the HOA seal and all the smug formatting you'd expect from a suburban manifesto. It claimed that due to incomplete withdrawal documentation, I was still subject to internal HOA process, and until the board approved the release, I may not transfer physical assets off the property. In plain terms, she was telling me I couldn't move my own damn furniture without permission. I didn't respond. I wasn't about to start treating this place like a rogue nation-state. Instead, I hired a local moving company, scheduled the truck, and began boxing my things. I made sure to film everything. Karen might have been delusional, but I wasn't about to give her a sliver of plausible deniability. 2 days before the move, she showed up again. This time, she didn't bother with pleasantries. She marched right up to me while I was organizing my garage and declared, "You are in direct violation of community transfer policies." I didn't even blink. "You have no legal authority here, Karen. This isn't a negotiation." Her smile was gone now, just raw, cornered control freak energy. "If you remove a single item from this property without proper release, we will report you to the authorities." That was her move. Make the threat loud enough that the neighborhood heard it. 2 houses down, a couple paused mid-lawn work and turned their heads. Karen thrived on that. Public posturing, fear, control through rumor. I didn't give her the satisfaction. "Call whoever you want," I said. "I'll be moving out on Saturday, with or without your theatrical approval." She glared at me, nostrils twitching like a cartoon villain, then turned and stormed off. That night, I installed a ring cam, set up cloud storage, and wrote a full incident report to my lawyer. I didn't trust her for a second. On Friday evening, the moving truck rolled up. And at 6:30 the next morning, while the movers sipped coffee and began loading boxes, Karen arrived with a full HOA entourage, 3 other board members in matching polos and crossed arms, and physically blocked the driveway. I opened the garage and stood in disbelief. Karen pointed at the truck and shouted, "No assets leave this property until our inspection is complete." I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just came out. Loud, hard, and maybe slightly manic from lack of sleep. Karen, I said, walking toward her slowly. Step aside before you embarrass yourself further. But instead, she pulled out her phone and dialed 3 numbers. 911. The cops showed up 10 minutes later. 1 cruiser, 2 officers, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else on a Saturday morning. The taller one, Officer Langford, stepped out with a clipboard and a neutral expression while his partner lingered by the car, sipping from a thermal mug and assessing the situation like it was some kind of HOA-themed soap opera. Karen was already in full performance mode by the time they made it up the driveway. She stood tall, arms folded, flanked by her bored allies like a suburban war tribunal. Her voice was loud and sharp, the kind that made people across the street peek out from behind their blinds. "Officers, thank you for coming. This man," she pointed directly at me, "is attempting to remove property under dispute. This house is subject to HOA regulation, and he is in violation of our transfer compliance code." Officer Langford looked at me next, then at the movers, then at the half-loaded truck. He sighed. "Sir, can you explain what's going on?" "Yeah," I said calmly. "I'm moving. This is my house. Everything I'm doing is legal," Karen scoffed. "He's withholding HOA-mandated inspection access. That makes this move invalid." Langford raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, that's not how that works." I didn't wait for him to untangle whatever nonsense Karen was spewing. I reached into the folder I'd prepared and handed over a neatly clipped packet. Notarized proof of ownership, a signed copy of the sale agreement, the county registrar's confirmation of HOA withdrawal, and a printout of the 1998 land use clause. Langford flipped through the papers with the bored professionalism of someone used to sorting neighborhood pettiness from actual crimes. Still, when he hit the withdrawal notice and saw the county seal, his face changed slightly. "This document's official, stamped by the registrar's office," I said. "Filed last month. I'm not under HOA jurisdiction anymore." Karen stepped forward, indignant. "That clause is obsolete. It was overridden by a board decision in 2017. Langford frowned. "Ma'am, the board doesn't override county-level land use law. That's not your call." She jabbed a finger at the truck. "Then why is he moving without clearance? Why hasn't the HOA been allowed to inspect the property interior for compliance? What's he hiding?" Langford gave her a long, tired look. "Even if he were under your HOA, you wouldn't have the right to stop a private homeowner from moving out. That's not how law works." Karen turned red. Her jaw twitched. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Just a breathy, frustrated inhale that sounded like she'd swallowed a wasp. She turned to her bored allies, who suddenly had very important things to look at on the sidewalk. "I thought we were done." Officer Langford handed me my documents back and turned to leave. That's when Karen lost it. "No," she shrieked, and stepped directly in front of the moving truck. "I will not allow this. The HOA has not signed off. This is theft of communal assets. He can't remove so much as a lamp." The driver, a middle-aged guy named Dennis who looked like he'd seen his share of weird moving days, rolled down the window and asked, Can someone get this lady out of the way?" Langford took a step toward her. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to move." Karen stood her ground. "This is HOA property." "It absolutely is not," I snapped. "This is my land. These are my things. And you're trespassing." Karen didn't budge. She pulled out a phone and started recording. "This is evidence," she announced. "If he removes anything, I'll sue for HOA theft under Subdivision Code 14A. Officer Langford clearly had enough. He pulled out his radio and called it in. "Dispatch, we've got a civilian obstructing lawful activity, escalating behavior. Requesting additional unit." His partner, finally moving from the car, approached and gently but firmly asked Karen to step aside. She refused again. "You can't touch me," she snapped. "I have board authority." "No, ma'am," he replied. "You don't. Not here. Not anymore." Langford looked at me. "Mr. Ketterman, we're going to give her one last warning. After that, we'll need to detain her for obstruction." I nodded and leaned against the fender of my car, arms folded. The neighborhood had come alive by now. People standing on porches, phones out, HOA drama spreading like a slow-motion explosion. Karen finally stepped aside, but not without theatrics. She flung her clipboard to the ground and muttered, "This isn't over," before storming back toward her house like an actress cut off mid-monologue. Langford turned back to me. "You're good to proceed," he said. "We'll stick around until the truck's loaded, just in case she comes back with more nonsense." Appreciate it, I said. As the movers resumed loading, I couldn't help but glance down at the clipboard Karen had thrown. Half the papers had scattered across the lawn. I saw HOA letterheads, a printed satellite image of my property with red circles drawn in pen, and a handwritten note that simply read, "Never let him leave." I kicked it into the gutter. By the time the truck was halfway loaded, the morning sun was already hammering down like a personal insult. The officers stayed parked by the curb, watching in case Karen decided to return with torches and pitchforks, but things had calmed down. I started thinking maybe, just maybe, she'd burned off all her HOA righteousness and was licking her wounds somewhere, rage journaling in cursive. The movers kept at it, hauling boxes, disassembling furniture, asking the occasional polite question like, "You want this cactus wrapped or raw?" I was inside boxing up the last of the kitchenware when I heard the screen door creak. At first, I thought it was one of the movers coming in to ask about the tool bench, but when I turned around, I saw Karen in my house, holding her phone up like she was filming a documentary called Crimes Against Suburbia: The Miles Ketterman Files. She was walking through the hallway slowly, narrating in that smug voice people usually reserve for HOA meetings and divorce. Depositions, uninspected appliance removal, unauthorized light fixture change. Is that non-HOA approved window tinting? "Get the hell out of my house," I snapped, stepping between her and the dining room. She didn't even flinch. "You don't have the authority to eject an HOA representative performing compliance verification." "You're trespassing," I said, voice low. "There's no HOA authority here. You've been told that. By me. By the police. By the county." Karen smiled thinly. "The board disagrees. We are within our rights to document violations until the transfer is finalized." I stepped aside and pointed toward the back door she'd clearly slipped through. "You have 5 seconds to walk out on your own before I call the cops. Again." She didn't move. She lifted the phone higher, zooming in on my packed boxes like they were evidence in a crime scene. "Is this a surveillance system? Who approved that model?" I pulled out my own phone. Dialed. She took one last slow pan across the living room, then headed for the rear door. "You'll be hearing from our attorney," she muttered as she left. "There are still unresolved issues of community stewardship." The call connected. "Hi, yeah, it's Miles Ketterman. The woman you removed earlier, she just entered my house without permission. Yes, again. Through the back. She's gone now, but I've got footage from the ring cam." "No, I didn't touch her. She filmed the inside. I'd like to press charges." 20 minutes later, the same cruiser rolled back up. Langford looked about as amused as a man being asked to unclog the same toilet twice in one morning. "She really came inside?" he asked, already pulling out the report pad. "Through the back," I said, holding up my phone. "I've got full footage." He took the phone, watched the video. Karen slipping in, phone out, her voice clear, her attitude even clearer. "That'll do it," he said, then looked over at his partner who had just finished texting something and shook his head like he couldn't believe this was real life. They didn't even have to find her. Karen, to her credit or idiocy, showed up again 15 minutes later, this time with a rolled-up document in hand, waving it like a holy relic. "This is a temporary HOA injunction pending board review," she said, thrusting it at Langford as he stepped forward. He took it, read 2 lines, and handed it back. "This is a blank template, ma'am." Karen blinked. "You wrote your name on a PDF form and printed it," he said. "That's not a legal injunction. I'm executing a lawful citizen hold until HOA verification." "No," Langford said firmly, cutting her off. "You're under arrest. Trespassing, unlawful entry, harassment, and interfering with a private contractual process." Her face went pale, then red, then pale again. "You can't arrest a board president." "Ma'am, you are not the president of anything that gives you the right to break into someone's home." The cuffs came out. Karen lost whatever remained of her poise and started yelling about her husband knowing the mayor, the HOA's legal team, something about a sacred duty to enforce neighborhood tradition. The officers tuned it out like a bad radio signal. Neighbors had gathered again, and this time, no one was looking away. They were filming, whispering. A kid on a bike muttered, "Damn," like it was the best Saturday cartoon he'd ever seen. Karen was loaded into the back seat, still protesting. Langford came over to me. "You want to press charges?" "Absolutely," I said. He nodded. "We'll need you to come down next week to make the full statement." "But she's not coming back today." I watched the cruiser drive off, windows rolled up, Karen's voice still faintly audible. Then I walked around back, checked the rear door. Sure enough, my ring cam caught her trying the knob, failing, then wedging it open with a garden stake. I sent the clip to my lawyer before I'd even walked back inside. 10 minutes later, the moving crew asked if I wanted to break for lunch. "Not yet," I said. "Let's finish this while the street's still quiet." One of the guys chuckled. "Quiet? Man, this place is better than cable." By Sunday morning, my face was on the local news. I hadn't planned on it. I didn't call the press, didn't tweet anything, didn't post a single HOA Karen gets arrested clip, but someone else did. A neighbor maybe. Or one of those true crime Facebook groups that somehow get hold of every ring cam video before the police even do. Either way, there I was on the Channel 9 segment, blurry, box lifting, and visibly annoyed, with Karen mid-scream in the background trying to claw her way back into my living room. The caption read, "Neighborhood HOA president arrested for trespassing during property sale dispute." My phone didn't stop buzzing for hours. Calls, texts, voicemails, some people offering support, others asking for details, a few just wanting to know if it was really that Karen. Yes, it was. Exactly that Karen. But while half the neighborhood was busy gossiping, I was in my lawyer's office Monday morning with a folder so thick it needed its own seat. Gina Alvarez was the type of attorney who could make you feel both safe and slightly terrified at the same time. Former prosecutor, zero tolerance for procedural nonsense, and apparently fueled entirely by black coffee and spite. She leafed through the packet without blinking. "Jesus," she muttered. "She actually went inside the house. Filmed it too," I said, like she was shooting a realtor walkthrough. "She's not smart enough for that kind of arrogance," Gina said, marking pages with sticky notes like she was planning a legal ambush. "She's desperate. She knows she's losing control." I told her about the forged injunction, about the clipboard full of red ink satellite photos, about the HOA newsletter from last week claiming I had been removed for disruptive conduct, which, surprise, never happened. Gina didn't flinch. She just leaned back and said, "It's time we got them." That afternoon, she filed 2 formal complaints, one with the County Housing Oversight Commission and another with the Arizona Office of Homeowner Associations. The first was about Karen's unlawful interference with a private transaction. The second triggered something much more dangerous, a formal audit of Oakwind Trails HOA's internal operations. Within 72 hours, I received a call from a man named Lester Harold, a state-licensed auditor who sounded like he hadn't had a warm lunch in 15 years. He asked a few standard questions, then got to the good stuff. "Has the HOA ever attempted to block your title transfer without documented cause?" "Yes." "Have they issued fines post-withdrawal from the association?" "Yes." "Have you received letters from the board making legal claims unsupported by statute?" Karen sent one that said I couldn't move a lamp. Lester made a low sound halfway between a sigh and a chuckle. "That'll do." The following Friday, a white state vehicle rolled into the neighborhood. 2 men stepped out wearing state lanyards and walked directly into the Oakwind Trails HOA office, a converted 3rd bedroom in Karen's home, of course. She wasn't there. She was still out on bail and apparently instructed the rest of the board not to speak to outsiders. Unfortunately for her, the board had other ideas. Turns out, not everyone on the HOA council enjoyed playing Stasi. One of them, a woman named Judy, who had never once made eye contact with me in 5 years, met with the auditors and handed over a thumb drive. That thumb drive was a bomb. Gina and I got a copy through public disclosure. It contained 5 years of internal emails, HOA violation records, secret review logs, and most damning of all, a spreadsheet labeled controlled transfers. It listed every homeowner in the neighborhood who had attempted to sell in the last decade, with columns titled pressured to cancel, flagged buyer as HOA non-compliant, and blocked inspection certification. Gina's jaw clenched when she saw it. "This is evidence of systematic coercion," she said. "They've been illegally limiting home sales to maintain HOA power. This isn't just petty harassment. This is racketeering light." To make it worse, my name was on there. Next to a note, "Use fire code excuse if needed. Delay paperwork." But it didn't stop with me. 2 other families, the Cheneys on Birch Avenue and a young couple named Felix and Marina from down the hill, were listed under successfully blocked. Gina got on the phone with them. Within 48 hours, both had signed affidavits detailing how Karen had scared off their buyers with false claims about deed violations and threats of retroactive fines. Suddenly, I wasn't the only plaintiff. We were forming a class action. The next week was a whirlwind. Media coverage intensified. HOA members started resigning, and Karen finally lawyered up, but by then it was too late. The auditors had completed their review and found multiple legal violations. Illegal withholding of sales certifications, forged compliance notices, financial misreporting on over 20 fines, failure to disclose HOA opt-out clauses to multiple property owners, and then came the kicker. A hidden document buried in one of Karen's archived emails revealed that she knew about the 1998 exemption clause all along. Not only that, she had signed a previous version of it herself in a prior dispute 3 years ago. Her signature was right there, clear, undeniable. We printed it out, stapled it to the front of the lawsuit packet, and Gina labeled it Exhibit A, the death of their argument. The Oakwind Trails HOA wasn't just cracking. It was collapsing. By the end of the second week, 4 board members had resigned, not with dignity or statements about personal reasons, but in silence, like employees caught embezzling office coffee. Their names simply vanished from the HOA website, their roles left blank. No emails, no updates, just silence and the faint smell of panic. Judy, the woman who handed over the thumb drive, was the first to go public. She gave a quiet, nervous interview to a local journalist saying she'd been pressured for years by Karen to just sign things and let her handle the aggressive communications. She admitted she hadn't fully understood how deep the manipulation ran, but she was ashamed of what she'd been part of. The quote that stuck with everyone was this: "We weren't a homeowners association, we were a control cult." It spread fast. Local papers picked it up. A community watchdog podcast called Suburban Shadows ran a 2-part episode titled Karen's Kingdom, and suddenly my mailbox was full of letters from strangers, some supportive, some asking if they could buy my ring footage for their HOA horror documentaries. Karen, meanwhile, had gone underground. Not literally, she was still at home, but her blinds were shut, her porch light was off, and her SUV hadn't moved in 5 days. According to the neighbors, her husband had flown to his brother's place in Nevada. I wasn't surprised, but while Karen was busy hiding, my lawyer Gina was filing. We submitted the class action lawsuit to the county court with myself, the Cheneys, and Felix and Marina listed as plaintiffs. The list was growing. 2 more families reached out that same week, both with eerily similar stories of suspicious failed sales, sudden code violations, and threats from Karen when they tried to back out of community activities. The complaint was dense. It listed 19 distinct violations, including fraudulent interference with contractual transactions, abuse of nonprofit status, harassment, and malicious misrepresentation of property codes. But the best part? We filed for an emergency injunction to freeze all HOA operations and accounts until the court hearing, and the judge, bless him, granted it. That meant all HOA meetings were canceled, all fines were suspended, all spending was frozen. And Karen lost her power, officially. The news hit on a Thursday morning. I was packing the last items in the garage when I heard the most delightful noise of my entire year, the sound of Karen yelling in her front yard while being served court papers. The process server was calm. Karen was not. She shouted something about a deep state conspiracy against community values and tried to slam the door, but the man just taped the envelope to her porch column, took a photo, and left. I stood on my driveway, sipping coffee, watching the whole scene like it was a live performance of Desperate Housewives, HOA Apocalypse, but it wasn't over. Because the auditors weren't just done with the HOA's paperwork, they'd requested a subpoena for Karen's personal financial records. Turns out, she had been issuing fines, collecting the payments, but never reporting them to the board ledger. Thousands of dollars were missing. Gina called me that night. "She's in real trouble now," she said. "If they prove she pocketed funds from fake violations, we're not just talking about civil penalties. That's felony territory." How long do you think she has? Depends how stupid she is. The next morning, a U-Haul appeared in front of Karen's house. It wasn't hers. It was the Cheneys. They were finally moving. Sale approved. No HOA interference, no more threats. I walked over, shook hands with Mr. Cheney, and we shared a laugh about the whole saga. "I told my wife," he said, "if we ever move again, we're asking one question first. Is there an HOA?" "Smart," I said. "And if they say yes?" He grinned. "We keep driving." That day, I finished loading the last of my stuff. The furniture, the boxes, the grill, Karen hated so much, all secured, strapped, and ready to roll. My new place in New Mexico was waiting. No cameras, no codes, no committees, just land, sky, and peace. But before I left, I took a slow walk around the house one last time. Out back, I found one last friendly reminder flyer folded under the fence. Faded ink, dated last year, citing unauthorized patio furniture. I laughed, tore it in half, and dropped it into the garbage bin. Then I looked across the street at Karen's window, still closed, still dark, but not for long. If I thought the drama would fade once the HOA was frozen and the moving truck loaded, I was dead wrong. Monday morning, I was already halfway to New Mexico when my phone lit up with 3 missed calls from Gina and a text that simply read, "Call me. Now. Emergency." I pulled off the interstate into a dusty rest stop with 2 vending machines and 1 dying tree. I called. She picked up on the first ring. "She's filing a countersuit," Gina said, skipping any kind of hello. "Karen?" I asked, as if there were any other option, through a third-party lawyer she used once for a speeding ticket. "It's amateur hour, but she's claiming you defamed her, colluded with the other plaintiffs, and orchestrated a media smear campaign." I stared at the vending machine like it owed me an explanation. "She broke into my house." "I know. The video will crush this, but it means one thing. She's not going down quietly. She's stalling." Stalling. Classic Karen move. When the legal ground crumbles, change the subject, yell louder, create confusion. This wasn't about winning. It was about muddying the waters long enough to delay the inevitable. "Can we squash it?" I asked. Gina snorted, already filed a motion to dismiss. "This countersuit will fold faster than a HOA newsletter in a thunderstorm, but it means something else too." "What?" "She's scared, and when people like her get scared, they get reckless." 2 days later, I got proof of that. A friend still living in the neighborhood, Rachel, who I barely knew outside of waving at the mailbox, sent me an email. No subject, just an attachment, a blurry photo taken at night. It showed Karen on my old porch with bolt cutters. "Caught her around 11 p.m. Rachel's message read, "She ran off when my motion light turned on. Thought you should know." Gina forwarded it to the court. The judge issued a restraining order within 24 hours. Karen was now legally barred from coming within 100 yards of me, my property, or any of the co-plaintiffs. But even with the law breathing down her neck, she wasn't done. 3 days later, HOA members received an anonymous letter, poorly formatted, full of grammatical landmines, and clearly written in all caps until the writer realized the shift key existed. It accused me and the others of plotting a hostile takeover, installing surveillance devices to entrap leadership, and, my favorite, hiring a legal agent from a communist background to destabilize suburban values. We knew it was her. The writing style screamed Karen. The paranoia, the amateur sleuthing, the use of the word suburban values like it was a national security concern. But the real kicker came from the state auditor. He called Gina in the middle of the week and asked a simple question. "Has your client been made aware of the off-book account?" Gina relayed it to me over lunch. "What off-book account?" Turns out there was a second HOA bank account. Not registered, not disclosed, used, it seemed, to process certain cash-only fines and community security donations, all untracked, all illegal, and the signature authorizing the withdrawals? Karen, in 3 different places. We now had everything: financial misconduct, fraudulent documentation, harassment, illegal entry, violation of restraining order attempts, and now, the cherry on top, concealed funds. Gina's tone changed that day. "This is no longer just a civil case," she said. "This is criminal, and not small time either. She's going to prison, Miles." I didn't feel joy. Not yet. I just felt ready. Ready to close this. Ready to reclaim my life. So I did something I had been meaning to do since the day she first told me my garage lights were aggressively blue. I bought a heavy-duty granite marker, had it engraved, and before I officially handed over the keys to the new owner, a quiet retired guy named Joel who wore aviators and smiled like he'd lived through worse, I embedded that granite slab in the front yard where the old HOA sign used to stand. It read, "Private property, no HOA, no trespassing, no Karen." Joel laughed when he saw it. "Think they'll get the message." "I hope not," I said. "I hope they try." The courtroom was bigger than I expected. Colder too, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. High ceilings, neutral walls, the faint smell of floor polish, and nerves. The kind of place where things get decided and undone. I sat at the front table next to Gina, who looked like she'd slept in her blazer and drank espresso for blood. Across the aisle, Karen sat beside a defense attorney who looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. He wasn't wearing a tie. That told me everything. The judge, a tall, sharp woman with a no-bullshit voice, opened the session with a tone that made even the bailiffs straighten up. Let the record show that today's hearing concerns alleged misconduct by the Oakwind Trails HOA, including financial fraud, unauthorized surveillance, and coercion of property owners. Karen didn't blink. She sat with her arms crossed, expression locked in what she must have thought was stoic defiance. To me, it looked like a kid who'd just been caught lighting matches behind the school and was still insisting the smoke was decorative. Gina wasted no time. She presented every shred of evidence like it was a weapon: the emails, the forged forms, the manipulated buyer lists, the hidden bank account, the restraining order violation. Each piece landed like a hammer. The judge didn't interrupt once, but the moment that truly broke the room was when Judy, the former board member turned whistleblower, took the stand. She spoke slowly at first, voice trembling, but gained momentum like a train finally pulling away from a broken station. She told us the fines were necessary to maintain culture, Judy said, hands in her lap. She said anyone who left the HOA would create instability, that we had to make it hard for them. Did she ever instruct you to delay or deny legal paperwork to home sellers? Yes, many times. And were you ever told to threaten or intimidate neighbors into compliance? Judy hesitated. She didn't say the word threaten, but she said things like, make them regret it. Silence. Karen didn't look at her, just stared at the table. Then came the Cheneys, then Felix and Marina, then the accountant from the auditor's office who calmly confirmed that over $7,300 in fines were never recorded or transferred to the HOA budget. They were gone, all tied to Karen's authorization. Karen's lawyer objected once, something about circumstantial intentions. The judge shut it down before the last syllable. After closing arguments, the judge recessed for deliberation. 20 minutes later, we were back in the room. Her ruling was clear and final. The HOA was to be dissolved permanently. All homeowners released from any outstanding fines, liens, or restrictions. Karen Lassiter was found guilty of multiple civil violations, financial misconduct, and unlawful interference with property rights. Criminal charges, including fraud and trespassing, were referred to the county prosecutor. Karen didn't speak. Not when the verdict was read, not when the bailiff escorted her out to be processed, not even when a camera crew tried to shout questions at her outside the courthouse steps. She just kept walking. For the first time in years, she had nothing left to say. The story hit the news like wildfire, local first, then regional. HOA tyrant faces prison time. Homeowners win class action against suburban cult board. One of the headlines called it a landmark HOA meltdown. I couldn't disagree. Weeks passed, then months. I settled into New Mexico, got the tools out of storage, started building the porch I'd always wanted. No inspections, no neighbor complaints, no Karen tapping a clipboard at the edge of the lawn. One day, I got a letter from Joel, the guy who bought my house. It was short, written on a plain card with a photo attached. The card said, "They took down the last camera this morning. The street feels different now. Free. Thank you." The photo showed the front yard. My granite plaque still there, standing proud among the rocks and desert grass. Private property. No HOA. No trespassing. No Karen. And for the first time since this entire ordeal began, I allowed myself to smile. Not out of spite, not from relief, but because, finally, I was where I wanted to be. Free.